Okay, this week at the agenda saw a nation looking west for its power, border towns facing border trade-offs, and a modern vision of rural Ontario. The agenda's Week in Review begins, however, with a question: do we need to collect binders of non-white guests? Watch. We've done some number crunching, and here are some of the numbers for our program. This is percentage of programs that we've done here on the agenda with at least one visible minority guest. And our fiscal year in 2013 isn't done yet, which may explain why the last number is a little low. Fiscal ends, I guess, end of March. But here we go. In fiscal year 2010, 66%, 2011, 60%, 2012, again, we're around 2/3, and this year a little better than half, and obviously hope to be more reflective as the year goes on. One more set of graphics, if we can, here before we go on. Non-white faces in the media in general. If we look at broadcast hosts and reporters, number analyzed, 286, which is a percentage of visible minorities, just over 20%. Print columnists, 471, percentage that were visible minority, not even 4. Experts or pundits in broadcast, they looked at 343, just over 16%. Stories about everyday life, 200 analyzed, 23% visible minority. Photos in print, more than 2,000, again, less than a quarter, though, visible minority, for a total of, you can see, more than 3,000, less than 20%. Okay, Tina, these are your numbers, right?
These are numbers that were compiled by Ryerson's Diversity Institute for the Diversity Project.
How'd you come up with all these numbers? Let's start there.
Okay, so the Diversity Institute looked at a snapshot of media. They looked at broadcast and print media over the course of a week. And they were looking at two things in particular. They were looking at who the leaders are in the media, so who's making decisions about what's news. And then they were looking at representation. They were looking at who's reflected in the media. So what they found was interesting. The numbers that they saw reflected what we knew intuitively, what we knew anecdotally.
So no surprises for you there?
No surprises. But what is surprising to me is that in a city, these are statistics that reflect the Greater Toronto Area, and when you have a population where almost 50% of residents are visible minorities, to see that only 20% are being reflected on television and in print, that's very surprising, and to me that's a missed opportunity.
Well, print columnists, less than 4% of print columnists? You find that disturbing?
Well, I think that we need to, the media plays such a uniquely influential role in terms of showing us who our leaders are, who our experts are. They can, shape stereotypes, and they can also, shape the aspirations of young people. So I really think it's important that they're, as an institution, reflecting our values, that they're reflective of the population.
Ruben, let me go to you in Puerto Rico. Are there anything about those numbers that jumps out at you?
Not particularly. Actually, I would be curious to know. I know in the U.S., for example, there have been some analyses of the content of those stories. So, for example, it's pretty well established that the majority of the stories that feature, for example, in the news, that feature people of color are often stories about violence. So of course, it's not simply that people of color are not adequately represented, but it's also that the image that is construed through the media about particular groups oftentimes is negative. So it's not simply a question of numbers, and again, I don't think numbers are surprising. It's also a question of what is the nature of what's being represented through those stories? What is the nature of the kinds of images that are being put forward in those stories? So that would also be really interesting to kind of get a sense for.
Now, Hamlin, that's a good point. There's no point in having a lot more black faces on television if they're always being let off in handcuffs somewhere, is there?
No, not at all.
That's not helping.
Yeah, I mean, what's your reaction to those numbers when you see those numbers as a host of a major television program like this? What's your reaction?
You think
to those
we're a major
numbers?
television program, eh?
Sure.
I'm delighted to hear you say that.
What's your reaction to them?
Well, the one number that jumps out at you, because it's so much lower than everybody else's, is the number of print columnists. 3.4% of the print columnists in the Greater Toronto Area are from visible minority groups. I mean, in a city that is attempting to serve where half the people are of a visible minority background, that seems awfully low.
Awfully low, yeah. Well,
Am I wrong to infer that?
Oh, of course not. I mean, I'm not surprised at these numbers, and these numbers were compiled, this was back in what?
2010.
2010, okay. Back in year 2000, my organization did a similar research, looking at some of the major networks, whether it was CTV, CBC, City TV, a number of them, same reaction. We did the same analysis of news programs out of Buffalo, New York. Same kind of analysis. It speaks then to me, it says to me that there is a fundamental problem with the way we do news gathering in this industry. So it's not just a Toronto problem, it is a problem right across North America in terms of how we gather news, who gets to be in front of the camera, and has a great impact on who's behind the camera, because somebody behind the camera must make a decision as to what stories we cover, and depending on the stories you cover, you'll decide as to who will be in that story. So it's not just a question of the numbers anymore, Steve. It's about the fundamental way we gather news and information programming in this industry right across North America.
I haven't got first reactions yet from Sarita or Susan, so let's do that. Sarita?
Well, I'm just interested in that very low print media number, and I haven't done research on it, so I can't say why, but to me, it makes you wonder if it doesn't reflect a problem with the way we think about diversity. Because often the approaches to diversity are aimed at a public relations exercise. So in a sense, the visual face, the superficial is what's important. And in print media, that benefit, that gain isn't always there in the same way that it might be in putting a host on a face of...
I'm going to challenge you on that, because if you're a print columnist, your picture's on your column.
I don't know, that's to say I don't know, but I think to me that's what it speaks, partly what it speaks to, is that approaches to diversity are often about appearances. And I think television is much more appearance, visually oriented than print media. So that may be something, I don't know, I'm speculating.
No, that's a fair comment.
As I'm a researcher, I'm an academic, so that would be something, if someone wants to research this, that's what I would be asking about, is where are the decisions made, how are they made about how to become more diverse? And is it about things like how do we look? Is it about how do we gain greater viewership? Because if we put someone in front of the camera, a host who's a person of color, then that will be an easy way to signal diversity. And that's, I think, indicates a fundamental problem with the way that we think about diversity. So that's, to me, a broader conversation, which is...
We'll get to the broader conversation.
Yeah.
But Susan, let me give you your first kick at this.
You know, when I hear those numbers again, I'm extremely annoyed, because the first time I met Hamlin Grange was 30-odd years ago at a conference where we were talking about increasing the diversity of the faces and voices on Canada's broadcast system. So it's very annoying to see that 30 years later, nothing much has changed.
Well, is that true? Nothing much has changed?
Well, maybe the numbers were much smaller then. Yeah. Maybe we're completely invisible at that time. But here we are now, and we're still talking about it. And why is it still important? Well, let's look at why it was important then and now. The media in Canada has its obligation to reflect Canadians back to themselves. Right? And how do we know that the mediation of the media is accurate if it doesn't use a prism that recognizes all of our different and diverse views? Without that kind of diversity and the obligation to actually better reflect all of our diversity, then you will make all of those mistakes that represent certain colors of people in certain kinds of character assassinations, I would say, and never include them as simply the doctor at the table. Now, TVO happens to be one of those broadcasters that makes a real effort to have, last session, Dr. Samir Sinha, who is a person of South Asian descent, acting as a doctor, not as a South Asian. And that's what we have to see much more. We should stop having to talk about this, but it's unfortunate that we still are.
We brought him on because he's one of the foremost gerontologists in the country.
So. Exactly
Obviously,
so.
He happens to be South Asian, but that's not why he was brought on.
That's the important thing. And with the 4% that you talked about in print journalism, it was the print columnists.
Yes.
Not just the
reporters,
general
yes,
reporters. Columnists hold an extremely valuable, influential, and expensive part of the news organizations. So while the news organizations try to talk about being, all things, all people, and we value diversity, they actually spend the money on, a select group of people. So that has to change.
It is a Canada that is not as we knew it. A Canada whose power base has shifted from Ontario and Quebec to the West and the suburban middle class. This is John Ibbitson's Canada, and he joins us now to tell us more about these changes, which he outlines in The Big Shift, which he co-authored with pollster Daryl Bricker, and it's great to have you back here at TVO, Mr. Ibbotson, sir.
Good to be back, Steve.
I always think it's hilarious that we talk about the Laurentian Consensus with you, because you are it personified. But anyway, you are describing its demise here, and here's our first quote from the book that we're going to read. The Laurentian elites don't realize that Canada no longer belongs to them. A country that was once part of the Atlantic world is becoming part of the Pacific world. The provinces that mattered most don't matter as much anymore. The country's center has shifted west, and power has shifted with it. In fact, power is now shared by two groups, Westerners and Ontario's suburban middle class, especially the immigrant suburban middle class. In terms of power and priorities, nothing else and no one else is as important. As we unpack that, because you've had a few visits here to tell us about the Laurentian Consensus, give me your best 30 seconds on what that is, and then we'll go from there.
Well, you're right. First of all, this book exists because of this TV show, so thank you for that. A little over a year ago, I was asked to give a speech for the Big Ideas series on what was happening in Canada. And I had been bothered by the fact that a lot of us were misunderstanding what had happened in the 2011 election that gave the Conservatives their majority government. And it seemed to me that's what was happening, that there had been a great shift in power. And that shift was advantaging the suburban middle class, who were in common cause now with the Western voters who had always voted Conservative. But the West was growing. It was more powerful. There were more people. There was more wealth.
And the Laurentian elites were?
And the Laurentian elites, they were and are the political, academic, business, cultural, and media elites in basically Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, who had run the country for most of the country's history by consensus. They debated the big issues, they reached a consensus, they implemented that consensus. And by the way, they created a great country. We owe them a lot. But they had been losing power, first of all to the suburbs, second of all to immigrants, the two Torontos that we have brought into this country in the last 2 decades, and to the West. And that this shift was permanent and it was big. And that was the speech. And a couple of months later, Daryl Bricker phoned me because he'd seen the speech on YouTube, I think. And he said, you know what, you're right, but you have no data. I have data, because Daryl's the president of Ipsos Reid Public Affairs. We ought to do a book. And he took it to HarperCollins, and HarperCollins said, yes, but you only have 6 months because political ideas have a short shelf life. So
even when they're permanent?
Even when the shift is permanent, the idea of the shift is ephemeral. So we wrote it. It came out last week, and it's doing really, really well. And again, we have you to thank for it.
Very provocative blue flag, blue Canadian flag on the cover. Would the Ottawa bureau chief of the Globe and Mail be part of the Laurentian Consensus?
One of the things that we say in the introduction of the book is that we're committing treason against our own class. Not necessarily against the country, I hope, but yeah, we're a couple of Laurentian elites living in Laurentian neighborhoods. But one of the things that started all of this was after the election, Daryl and I talked a fair bit, even did back then. And we both agreed that everything we were reading, everything we were watching on television about what was happening was wrong. It was about the false Harper majority, about the Conservatives, lucking into or perhaps, fraudulently grabbing a majority government. And they weren't realizing that, no, this Conservative majority government, whether you like it or hate it, is the product of big tectonic plate shifts going on inside the body politic. And it's not going to go away. Doesn't mean the Conservatives win this election or that election, but it means suburban immigrants in the 905, in alliance with the West, are dominating the policy agenda of the country, and that's going to go on for a long time to come. So we thought, well, why don't we tell our brethren in the Laurentian elites that, well, you know what, we don't matter anymore, and it's time we realized it.
Do you feel bad about that?
No. It's not that I don't like the Canada that the Laurentian elites created. In fact, I love the Canada that the Laurentian elites created. I love especially the multiculturalism that they created. The fact that we did open our doors as no other country on earth has opened its doors to so many people from so many places. But they're not the people who came here, for example, after the Second World War. They're not the people like my ancestors who came after the First World War. They have different priorities, different interests. Some of them are different from mine. But what I love is the fact that they are seizing the country, and they are seizing the agenda, and they are driving us forward. And I do believe it is forward. I love the idea that the West is no longer a region, that it's the new center. I love the fact that Canada is becoming a Pacific nation rather than an Atlantic nation. There are things that I regret, but essentially I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist especially about the fact that these new immigrant Canadians are embracing the country and driving a kind of a nationalism, a patriotism even, that our generation was embarrassed ever to embrace. So on the whole, I think it's a good thing.
If you're thinking about, though, the ease or relative difficulty of governing the country. And this is one of the hardest countries to govern, just, you know, very few people, a lot of space. Is it harder now to govern the country if the center of gravity is not where the Laurentian elites hang out and used to hang out, but rather the West, suburban, ex-urban Ontario, and essentially that's it?
But one of the things the Laurentian elites themselves always believed was that Canada was fragile. It could break up at any moment. It's ungovernable. It's like a hummingbird. You know, it theoretically can't fly, and yet it does. So, yeah, there's a shift in power. Yes, one region that used to be peripheral is becoming central, but that doesn't make the country any less governable. It's going to make changes, absolutely. One of the things that we talk about in the book is what we call the Ottawa River Curtain, where everything east of the Ottawa River, Quebec and Atlantic Canada, they are not bringing in immigrants. They're not even trying very hard, frankly, to bring in immigrants. Their populations, in consequence, are aging and declining. Their economies are aging and declining. And the assumption that the Laurentianists always maintained, which was that there would be interregional transfers of wealth from the richer part of the country to the poorer parts of the country, I don't think that's an assumption that these immigrant Canadians themselves embrace. They want to know why. Why is money going to these people? Why are seasonal industries considered so important? Why must the equalization program be what it is? So there are going to be challenges, and there are going to be tensions, and there are going to be stresses, but we've never been farther away from a Quebec referendum on separation than we are right now, even with a PQ government in Quebec. And I think it cannot weaken the country to have the West now not only in, but running the place.
Hillary Clark, our producer, put something up on our website, and boy, she got quite a torrent of responses. Here's one of them that I want to read right now, and then let's chat about this. I live in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the poster says. Since 9/11, I have disliked shopping across the border due to bad experiences with heightened border security. I do not regularly go over there for gas and groceries like some Ontario Sioux people do. Frankly, I think Sioux, Ontario has much better meat and produce, and some items such as olive oil and spices are cheaper in Canada. However, my husband and I often order more expensive items online to be picked up in Sioux, Michigan, because we are outraged that companies think they can get away with charging absurdly higher amounts to Canadians. For example, several years ago, I bought a camera in the States for $300 that was priced at about $550 in Canada. That's ridiculous. I would prefer to shop in Canada, but I'm not throwing away an extra $250 on a camera because companies know they can get away with gouging Canadians. Okay, let's go around on this one. Deanne, your response.
Thank you for asking me to respond first. We just presented a whole report before the Senate committee looking at price differences. And there are a lot of components that go into determining the final price. One of the things that we've noticed, not as much on food and gas, but on those more expensive items, it's not unusual for vendors that sell in the United States and also sell in Canada, that sell at a higher price in Canada. And in some cases, they're for all the right reasons. So we're a smaller country, so we don't have economies of scale. More expensive to do packaging that reflects our local regulations. Mind you, our retailers in Canada have been putting a lot of pressure on some of the vendors so that they can adjust their pricing. But for consumers, it would be a lie for me to sit here with you and to say that eventually the prices will be the same. There will be a difference because of costs associated with doing business here. However, that consumer can be assured that retailers are working hard so that the difference is smaller, not as great as she's mentioned in her email to you.
Ambarish, I think you testified before that Senate hearing that was looking into this issue. Where are you on that person's post to our website?
You know, I think $200 difference on a camera, she should absolutely go down to Michigan and, you know, buy the camera there. Here's the thing. It's true that businesses, retail businesses in Canada and Ontario in particular, face a higher cost of doing business. They face higher taxes. They're doing business in a smaller market. Generally, that cost cannot be spread over as big a market as American firms can. But it's not just the higher cost of doing business in Canada or in Ontario. It's also the fact that retailers in general, businesses in Canada, in many cases face less competition. Some of the specific industries that I'm studying are airlines right now. We have a pretty protected airline industry in Canada. As a result, prices here are much higher. And it's not a surprise that Canadians would find it much cheaper to drive to border airports in the US. That's something we're studying right now. You know, if you're a family of four and you can save $200 per person on a ticket, save something like $800 to $1,000 if you want to go down to Florida or to Las Vegas, then you absolutely will, and you should. So I'm a little sympathetic to businesses in Canada and Ontario for the higher tax burden they face, higher regulatory burden in many cases, but I'm not completely sympathetic because the lack of competition here allows them to price higher. That's simply what the market allows them to do. And I'm in favor of businesses pricing, however they feel free. I don't believe in this language of gouging. I think firms should set whatever price they want. But I also believe that consumers should be free to, shop wherever they want as a result. And so if businesses want to price higher, Canadians should be free to, pay lower.
Jim Stanford, your view on this?
Well, it's not just that we have specific costs in Canada or that certain taxes are higher in Canada. There's another, I think, bigger issue, and that's the fact Canada is a separate country with a separate currency and a separate economic history. So the average prices that we pay for everything in life, that's what economists call the price level. There's no reason to assume that it should be equal to what the price level is in the United States, because we have decades of history of differential inflation rates and a different system for our economy that's baked into the price level that we pay. The reason that things suddenly look more expensive in Canada is because the exchange rate has gone up. If the exchange rate was actually at the level that economists think makes sense, based on purchasing power levels in the two countries, it would be around 80 cents US, and things in Canada wouldn't seem that expensive. There would still be price differences on some items, but across the gamut, you wouldn't have the same sense that Canadians are being gouged. And in fact, when the dollar was at around 80 cents, a sort of fair value, if you like, we didn't have that whole cross-border shopping phenomenon. Yes, Canadians would go and visit America and they'd shop while they were there, but Americans would come back to Canada and the flow was largely balanced. So I think the exchange rate, far above its fair value, is a big part of the problem here.
Jim, let me ask you a follow-up here, and I'm really not trying to ask one of these smart aleck gotcha questions here, but I am curious. Your union represents people who are in Windsor and in St. Catharines, and those are both cities that are pretty close to the U.S. border. I'm wondering in the course of doing business whether the union might ever, if officials were going to Windsor rather, fly into Detroit or fly out of Detroit because it was cheaper, or go to Niagara Falls, New York, instead of Niagara Falls, Ontario, to get to St. Kitts because it was cheaper. Does that ever happen?
Oh, absolutely not, Steve. Not while you're on union business. I can't speak for what every single CAW member does with their spare time. I'm sure there are some CAW members who do go cross-border shopping, but as an organization, we're firmly committed to spending our money in Canada, and we think as a matter of our culture, it makes sense to promote Canada, but more importantly, as a matter of policy. We talked earlier in the show about the federal government's decision to dramatically increase the exemptions, which actually encourages people to go cross-border shopping. Why on earth would our own government, at a time when they're trying to balance their own budget, encourage Canadians to have that expenditure and that tax money leak out? So there is a role for patriotism, and my organization is very patriotic, but there's also a role for smart policy in terms of setting us up for success to pay for the things we need in Canada.
William, do you agree with Jim that if the dollar were at 80 cents instead of whatever it is, 96 or 97, much of this story goes away?
Oh, absolutely. We've done research at the University of Windsor on this whole question of how many people go across the border, and the variable that has the most impact on it is the exchange rate. Interestingly, just to comment on on the viewer's comment saying that she doesn't like to go across the border since September 11, 2001. All the studies that we've done and other people have done have shown a very clear effect that you actually don't get as much cross-border shopping post 9/11, generally because of the fact that people are uncomfortable with the security regime at the border. It seems like in the last year or so that effect has kind of gone away. For a long time what we were seeing is levels of border crossings that were lower than we would have expected given the strong Canadian dollar. What we see in the last year all of a sudden was we're starting to see these record border crossings, and so I think this post 9/11 effect that was dampening down the cross-border shopping has kind of come to the end of its life, and people are no longer thinking about how the border used to be. They're just thinking about how the border is, and they can deal with it.
If people see that the economic progress, in inverted commas, being made in this province or in the big cities, the jobs are disappearing from rural Ontario, the demographics in rural Ontario are certainly much older than the demographics in the rest of the province, what's to stop somebody who lives in a city or in a suburb from concluding the investment of the future ought to go in the cities and not in rural Ontario?
Well, they do so at their peril because they have to eat the food we produce in rural Ontario. They need the power that we're now producing with all, well, apparently going to produce with all these wind turbines, which are ruining the landscape in rural Ontario and a lot of health of a lot of people. They need, where are they going to go on the weekend when they climb down out of their apartment in downtown Toronto, if not up through rural Ontario? And there have to be roads for them to do that, and there have to be amenities here when they get there. So I don't think it's anywhere near that simple, that it's all happening in the cities, so let's forget about rural Ontario. I think they need us every bit as much as we need them.
Mark, how would you answer it?
Well, I think that's a great response. One of the challenges is the pace of change in rural Ontario is less visible, say, than it is in downtown. But certainly we need good infrastructure, partly so we can get our inputs in as farmers and get what we produce out again. We also need those good roads and bridges and so on, so that people can come out to rural Ontario, whether it's to come to a farm to pick some produce or to enjoy some tourism, whether it's to go to a play in a rural area, whether it's to go to their cottage or a beach or whatever. We're all very, very interconnected. If they want all of the development to simply go in the urban area, then perhaps we just shut the tap off to the water and the food and the gas and the power, and the moment the store shelves are empty, what are they going to do? We're all connected. We all have to get along. We have to find a way to make sure that there's development in both areas, so that this province can do its best going forward.
Anita, you live in a city, right?
Well,
you work in a city. You work at the University of Guelph.
Well, no, I work from my home.
You work from your home,
yes.
But you're affiliated with the University of Guelph.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, what's a food laureate anyway? That's your title.
Oh, I'm writing my job description right now. I'm trying to connect within the university, and Guelph is Canada's food university, and I would suggest that Guelph is pretty close to being the center of food action central for the entire nation. I'm trying to connect the silos that exist within the university, because one department doesn't know what the other department is doing and so on. It's quite amazing.
So let me pick up on that word connect. Do you think that people in cities understand the connection that we've had two other guests already describe with rural Ontario in their everyday lives?
Yeah, I think some do. You know, as you may or may not know, I work with chefs a lot across the country. I've got 250 or so. Well, that's the history of Canadian food. The project I'm working on now is connecting chefs from coast to coast to coast for one food day across the country, and we're doing it. This is our 10th anniversary. The people, from my perspective, who are the brand advocates, are the chefs, are the leading chefs of the nation. They're the ones that are going to put on their menus. They're going to tell their patrons what's going on, and they are going to shop from people like Mark. They're going to shop from people like Rowe Farms and so forth. Cumbray Farms, the cheese makers, Upper Canada Cheese, Ruth Classen and Montforte. These are the people who are actually going to be doing the education. And so what my job, again, as Food Laureate is doing, is I'm bringing some of the chefs and writers to the university to see exactly what's going on. 2 weeks ago, we did a potato tasting. I actually had 4 chefs from across Canada there. We did a potato tasting of 12 different kinds of potatoes. 2 of them were actually known. The rest were numbered varieties. We have a potato day at the university.
All grown in Ontario?
All grown in Ontario and trialed at the university, and they're being developed at the university and so forth. We also went to the Biodiversity Institute, which is the hub of the International Barcode of Life project. Paul Hébert, who developed this technology, is there, and we're doing DNA sampling. And their focus, one of the commercializations that they could do is food fraud. So I mean, there's a tremendous amount, and nobody sort of within the university has gone over and seen his 45-minute presentation. So those are the things that I want to do.
Let me pick up with Jim Merriam on this aspect. We hear a lot of talk in political circles these days about values, and I want to get your take on whether you think urban Ontarians and rural Ontarians actually share the same values.
No, I don't think they do. For the most part, I don't think they do. There are individual circumstances, obviously, that might differ, but the values out here still involve the idyllic things that we've talked about in our photos. They involve family, and church is still huge in many parts of rural Ontario, no matter what you read, and the environment and all those kinds of things. And Friday night at the bar is not part of it, and going to the theater is not part of it in the same way that it is at the city. And I'm not saying those are bad things, but the priorities are totally different, I believe, and therefore the values are different as well.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, or on our iTunes channel, or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.